Probably not a good idea to use a cell phone.
Close down, put it dorm, bring it back. We lost
Are we on?
$75,000 in.
Good evening.
Anyway.
Welcome to the February 11th regular school board meeting for the Pullman School District. We will have our flag salute. Dan, would you lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dan.
Yes, sir.
We'll have our first item, which is the approval of the agenda. Dr. Sturm, do we have any changes this evening?
I don't believe so. Do we have a... Yeah, we have a brief 10-minute executive session, and it's on the agenda. So.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the agenda as presented. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. We now move into our visitors section. If there are any visitors in the room that would like to address the school board, you may do so by getting up to the podium and giving your name, and you'll have it for 3 minutes to make your presentation. The board will listen, but may not discuss it this evening. So do we have any visitors that would like to address us this evening? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to our next item, which is reports, correspondence, and programs. We'll start with our board reports. Dean?
I do have something to report tonight.
Okay.
I got to spend 3 days over in Olympia this last week. On Thursday, I spent about 20 minutes with Representative Fegg and about 15 minutes with Representative Schmick and about half an hour with Senator Schessler. We talked over everything from soup to nuts, it seemed like. And then on Friday, I attended the facilities TAC meeting, and there were some interesting items there. There was a, I guess it was a capital budget passed in 2013. Washington legislature included a $500,000 install commercial wood grade pellet heating system in 2 schools in the state of Washington. So a number of schools applied for that. TICO got one of those grants, and so they're in the process of designing and probably engineering and then installing a wood pellet burning furnace system for the school. So that was interesting. I hadn't heard that before. There's some interesting bills coming at us. By the way, the bill cutoff date is the 20th this year, so if they don't make it through out of committee by then, they're dead for the year. Bill, I don't know if it's a House bill or Senate bill, but it's 5190. It would eliminate the need to have art as a part of a building project if it were to pass. Bill 4210 would allow a bond, if it was run during the general election, to pass at 50% voter passage. And then, let's see, there was one other item I was going to report on. Oh yes, there's a bill that says, I'll get to my page here. Oh, that would concern the governor's budget. And in the governor's budget, even though the state is moving toward all-day kindergarten, they only have had $10 million budgeted for that, which would build approximately 30 classrooms, which didn't seem to make much progress toward all-day kindergarten across the entire state. So that completes my report.
Good. Thank you, Dean. Carl?
No report.
Allison?
No report.
Oh, okay. Well, I do. I'm going to mention our district. We've been, over the past 18 months, the Pullman School Board, along with Superintendent Sturm, have been doing facilities planning, where we've visited all the schools within the district, including the transportation, the bus barn, and So we're finally coming into some kind of a conclusion on that after 18 months. And this will allow us, the board, to prioritize in terms of future budgeting and maintenance. And so this has been a long process that the public has not seen, but we actually have been working. So I just wanted to confirm that we have been working very hard, and hopefully something will come out from that at one of our future board meetings. And then Pullman High boys are playing this evening in the, I think it's for district playoffs, is that correct?
First
Okay.
round.
West Valley up at Lincoln Middle School. So we wish the boys best of luck. And that's all I have for this evening. And then we'll move on to superintendent's report.
Thank you. We have, I'm gonna move to the second item on our agenda there. We have some visitors from Pullman High School, ASB. They had a trip. I'm gonna turn it over to Desiree Gould, the vice principal at Pullman High School, and learn about a political junket that they took.
Political junket, yes, that's what it was. Good evening, and thank you. I want to introduce you to a couple of my ASB students who we went on a trip to Olympia thanks to this young man. This is Anish Papu, and he'll tell you a little bit about how this all came about. And then this is Tanner Day, and they want to talk to you a little bit about our trip and getting to see Representative Fagan and Representative Schmick and Senator Schlussler also. We got to do all of that too. So I was like, hey, it sounds like our trip. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to them, and they'll tell you a little bit about how much fun we had.
Thank you, Ms. Gould. So as Ms. Gould said, my name is Anish. I'm a senior at Pullman High. And last year I applied to a council. It's called the Legislative Youth Advisory Council of Washington State. And so they take about 22 members from across the state of Washington, and it acts as kind of an official youth addition to the Washington State Legislature. And so we make recommendations on current policy directives and objectives that the Washington State Legislature is facing currently. And every year we have an annual event called Youth Action Day, where we bring together different youth groups. We call them ambassador groups from all across the state together. We congregate in Olympia for a weekend to discuss current issues that the Senate and House are facing, the legislature is facing, also, in addition to different bill ideas and objectives that the council has determined for the year. And so each council member is able to invite one group. And so I thought it'd be really cool for Pullman High ASB to come with me to Olympia for that weekend. And so we spent 2 days in Olympia together, the first of which consisted of various workshops centered around not only educating the youth that were able to come about civic involvement and education, but also about the different policy items that we were targeting as a council. And then the next day was spent all day meeting with different legislators. Our council arranged about 84 meetings with different legislators on the Capitol during that day. And so we were able to speak to them and show them what the youth had to say. And so it was a really cool opportunity for us. And thank you all. I'll turn it over to Tanner.
Hello. As Anish said, I'm Tanner Day. I'm also a senior at PHS, and I joined the ambassador group, and it was really unique. The second day, we got to hear a speech from Lieutenant Governor and the Governor. He kind of went over his budget for us and explained it to us, and then we got to go to our meetings. We got to meet with Representative Fagan for about 45 minutes. We spent a very large chunk of time talking with her, mainly about education and that process. And then we were able to split up and go to other senators and representatives. I actually split from the group, kind of more on a personal agenda. I got to actually meet with Representative Jay Rodney to talk about helping me get in contact with some federal representatives. But as a group, they all continued to talk to senators and representatives about these bills. And we got to it was a really good chance to express our concerns with current things going on. There's some bills that have passed and are passing that really do concern the youth. The bill that goes into effect next year is I forget the name, but it's the 1080 law, where you have to then spend 1,080 hours in classroom time. And that's kind of a big concern. We were talking about that. It takes away a lot of the culture of schools. You learn a lot outside of class. Of course, classroom time is important, but too much class time is superfluous. It's just that, it's too much class time. So I want to thank you for this opportunity, and I'll turn it back over to Mrs. Gould.
So we want to thank you also for, I mean, this was kind of a whirlwind. We found out on Tuesday, because Monday was a holiday, we found out Tuesday that we had been accepted as a group. And so then we spent the next 3 days getting kids to go, and then we left at 5:30 in the morning on Sunday. And so we want to thank you, especially Dr. Sturm, for getting us the approval to do an overnight trip. And we stayed in cabins, and Tanner showed off his basketball moves with some of the kids from the West Side inner city schools, so that was kind of fun. But yeah, we got a chance to talk to Representative Fagan, like they said, 40 minutes, including talking about 1080. And she says, as part of the education committee that she sits on, they do some studies. And so when we brought up the issues of how, you know, now we were going to have to cancel our PEP assemblies, which is part of the school culture, and that right now we have a 15-minute break, which actually includes passing time, that basically we were going to cut it down to 5-minute, a 5-minute passing and 5-minute food. So that means kids getting into line quickly, scarfing down their food, and getting back to class. You know, and yet they talk about nutrition being important. And, you know, so she said that she would look into that a little bit more for us. I also had Representative Schmick. I talked to him a little bit about mental health and the youth, and, you know, how sometimes we have our hands tied with our kids. And he's already had 2 people call me since I've gotten back. So, I mean, I really appreciate the fact that they listened to what we had to say. So, and the kids were great. They were so good. That Anish told us, hey, you have to dress, you know, business casual on Sunday and then business formal on Monday. And Representative Fagan's LA said, hey, you guys look pretty good. And I was like, yeah, we were going for best dressed. She said, I think you won. So anyway, again, thank you for the opportunity, and we had a great time.
Thank you for representing us. Why don't you come through so we can shake your hands, all right?
Thank you.
Thanks. Very well done. Nice job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Why?
much.
Thank you so much.
Good job.
What's the federal?
I'm actually, back in August, I began applying for the Marine Corps. And I had some waivers turned down, but if I can get a federal person to back me, I can actually still get in. And that's a huge deal for me.
Yeah.
So.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.
Thanks for going.
Thanks again.
Have a good night.
It's always great to see our students outside the school, and they actually give us a good reputation, which is great. So, thank you. All right, Dr. Sturm, we'll move on then.
Okay, construction update. I did not attend the construction meeting this week. Dan and Joe were there for me. They briefed me and we've talked about it. I guess really the only thing to say is that you know, it's on schedule and it's moving along, and it's, you know, there's not other than what you can see, the progress that you can see if you drive by, it's moving forward. No big issues that have come up. There's always a few problems to solve and changes that we have to consider, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in one of our discussion items. But yeah, this project is probably going to see about as many change orders as projects do, because it's just so complex, and as they dig into it, they find out new things. And, you know, importantly, at least to date, the changes have been mostly reducing cost. So that's a real plus in that the contractor, the architects, and our project management team, along with many of the subcontractors, have really looked at the overall project, and whenever they can find a way to do it more simply or cost effectively, they've done it and saved us some dollars. So we'll need those as we go through this project, I'm certain. So it's a good way to start on the project. As you know, the bids came in a little bit more than we had estimated, and so getting some cost savings is really a plus. We're really the design team and project managers are really paying attention so that we don't make changes that impact the quality negatively. So they're usually ways to strategies for construction that save money. So far, those have been the things that have saved the most amount of money. If you have questions, Dan, anything else?
Well, there was just a couple of interesting items I think that we went over was they're finalizing the walls on the first wing right now. And then next week they'll actually be pouring footings for the commons, running up the commons area. So that's pretty exciting. So they're well underway for that particular part of the phasing.
Good. And if you haven't looked on the website or driven by, there's a lot of steel going up. So
Huge crane just assembled yesterday.
Yeah.
100-footer or more that will be helping with, I assume, with the steel that's going to arch across the gymnasium.
Yes.
Yeah.
and Bob has one item.
All right.
And I was just going to comment on a very productive collaboration day today. I was able to visit Sunnyside, Franklin, and Lincoln, and the teams, grade level teams, departments were working very hard with data and having good conversations on how to address the changing landscape of an education with the new legislative requirements. So really a lot of great work going on and hard work. So.
And I visited the high school today. And didn't get to every group, but I saw, spent some time with a couple of the groups, math, science groups, and they were likewise. Some of it's really difficult for the conversation at the high school not to migrate into what's going on around them. But that all impacts kids, and they've got a lot of planning to do for, moving different classrooms as the year progresses. So it's understandable if that's on their mind.
It's a good distraction.
Could I mention one more thing?
Sure, Dean.
At that TAC meeting, it was rather interesting. Rather than discussing the initiative 1351 probably wouldn't be acted on, they were discussing it as if it was going to happen, and their solution immediately was to put 34 students in a 900 square foot classroom with 2 teachers. And so it was a different dynamic.
Oh my gosh.
Different dynamic, different paradigm, the way they were looking at things over
That's a different kind of distraction.
there. Yes, it is.
We won't go there.
What was the number again, Dean?
1351
1351, yeah.
class size initiative.
We're okay then?
It doesn't seem
That's
like
all.
that was
All
the
right.
voters' intention.
Oh, that's the class.
Class size,
Oh,
class size.
Okay. We'll move on to our consent agenda, and in order to expedite our school board business, we will group our minutes, our warrants, our overnight field trip request, records destruction, personnel reports, and professional service reports together, unless the board would like to pull out something, and then we can address that separately. So how would the board like to proceed on the
I move
consent
approval
agenda?
of the consent agenda as distributed.
Okay.
I'll second.
It's been moved and second that we approve the consent agenda as presented. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. We have one action item this evening. This has come before us in a previous discussion. This is the master agreement language. Will you be presenting this, Bob, or?
I think it's me.
Okay, Dr. Stern.
I'm just trying to find the page.
Okay.
And
There we go.
okay, there we are. We've, as President Everman mentioned, we discussed this at the last meeting. There were 3 areas that we discussed in the master agreement language having to do with leave of absence, vacancies, leave of absence, and new parent leave. And there were, it had, the first one had to do with the length of time necessary to fill open positions. And we came to a tentative agreement that we would open positions in and out of the district simultaneously, as opposed to the way we've traditionally done it with opening it in district for in-district employees first, and then opening it out of district for a minimum of 5 days each. And then, of course, there's a process time in between those two, so it would stretch out to 3, sometimes 4 weeks to complete a hiring process. And it especially became problematic this year when we had the number of hires that we had to accomplish this last spring and summer. So we built in some safeguards for our employees that if any employee applies for a vacant position and they're qualified for that position, that they are given consideration. They're given an interview for that position. The interest there is that we want to have our employees have an opportunity to change positions if that's of interest to them. And we want to make sure that every employee that wants to have that opportunity gets that opportunity. We didn't want to shut that down by dividing it up into two separate positions or two separate processes. And then the leave of absence language was changed, was strengthened or clarified a bit, just to emphasize the need for employees to submit a letter of resignation if they're not planning to return, but also make it clear up front that that they need to have an intent to come back. We know things change, but there's just kind of a sense that some people go take a leave of absence and really don't have an intent, even sometimes move out of the area and don't have an intent to come back to the district. And we need to have them certify that they have a legitimate intent to come back. So that was and then I can't remember what we did to new parent leave.
It was just renumbering.
Oh, that's right, thank you. Yeah, there was some editing in the numbering.
Yeah.
So the language is in your packet. The specific language, hopefully I summarized that correctly. There's a numbering change. Thank you.
Any thoughts from the board? Any questions
Yeah,
for Dr. Stern?
I've thought of one thing when we discussed it last meeting, and I know that this has a due pass recommendation from the certificated staff and also from that our staff have worked on it heavily. In the past, when the position was opened internally and somebody was had all the right credentials for the other position, then it didn't ever move to outside candidate. Is that true about what happened? And in this case, although they will be interviewed, but they will have to also be competitive with those that apply from outside the district at the same time.
That's a good question. One of the points that's one of the points that we discussed and agreed that if we feel like we have a qualified pool of candidates in district, we don't have to open it out of district. That we can, it's not you have to open it out, but are permitted.
but
to
we
open.
can do it
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm not thinking about any particular teacher or position that was filled or anything. But I think this new process gives us an opportunity to, in some key areas, to have some stronger candidates rather than taking one that maybe with lesser newer training, particularly in the areas of technology maybe and so on, sciences maybe. And I think that that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally would like to commend the team that worked on it from the certificated side. That seems like, in a way, that they gave up something that possibly could really benefit kids in the district in the long run. That we might decide, yeah, knowing the personalities, yeah, it's an adequate pool, and we're before.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd wait, we'd interview, and then we would have to go through the process, as I understood it, of rejecting everybody before we could go out. And that's much harder to do than saying that we'd like to expand the pool some and have everyone interview on an even basis, because we might have a much more experienced teacher come from out of district with outstanding credentials and be a better candidate, even though we had somebody who met the minimum criteria for the position in district.
And that, I will say that that was one of the interests of both the certificated employees and the administrators is and we agreed, our goal is to get the best, to hire absolutely the best person. And
I just wanted to make sure that my thinking recognized that was an interest, because I, in all fairness, at times I've been critical of the bargaining team and so on, and I just want to, on the other side, be really praiseworthy when I recognize it. So, personally, I really like that aspect of it.
I think we all agreed in the end that we want the opportunity to bring people into our district that offer things that we may not already have, quality, skills, whatever, and so that was part of that discussion, and there obviously was agreement on both teams about that.
I just wanted to make sure that I understood it, and I'm heartened that what I understood is true.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I would move approval of the recommended updates to the master agreement.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the master agreement language. Any further discussion from the board? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you very much. We have a few discussion items this evening. The first is on facilities planning, and this will be by Dr. Sturm.
As the board knows, we had a work session between our last session, and anybody listening knows now because they heard Jim's board report. And we had a work session. Only 3 of the board members were able to attend that. So we had a discussion about the visitations that we've made as a board to each of our facilities, including the non-instructional sites. And so we've completed those observations. We are still analyzing those observations, and we'll continue to do that. We've kind of noticed that there are 2 tracks emerging. One is our current facilities, looking at our current facilities, and their needs for maintenance, repair, upgrade in some cases, and in relation to current needs, but also to responding to the enrollment growth that we've seen over the past few years, and the need to plan for potential continued growth, because our facilities, especially at the elementary level, are roughly at capacity right now, even though we added 6 classrooms last year. And we're knocking at the door at the middle school for capacity. We still have some there, but we're right at the optimal capacity that building was built for. There's always margin. Optimal means that teachers don't share their classroom during the period that they have a prep period. So if we use that, we have some capacity to continue to grow at the middle school. And of course, the high school is being built with excess capacity, so we should be in good shape at the high school for some time out into the future, even if we continue to grow in Pullman. So with that there really is no action being sought, but as Jim brought it up in his board report, it is an ongoing study and work that the board's doing, and Evan Ellis called me yesterday, so if you were listening to the radio this morning, it went public before you got a chance to talk to it publicly, but that's all right. I think they did a nice job summarizing this morning the process that we're going through. Probably a little more focus on an elementary school and purchasing property, but that's probably what the public is more interested in. And I think they were clear that, you know, this is very preliminary and probably out into the future, and we're also looking at other options. We're doing a study at Jefferson Elementary to see if there's any capacity there to add classrooms like we did at Franklin. And there's always an interim, maybe not as desirable, but portable or modular classrooms are always a way to get us over a period of time until growth gets to a point where we don't have a choice. But you know, I think it's important that we are looking out into the future and positioning ourselves, if possible, to have property that even if that didn't end up being the site, it would at least have us in the market so that we avoid the inflation of property values, which if we grow, that will occur. So with that, I emailed each of the board members today, and if you haven't looked at your email, there's a copy of this little survey to prioritize the needs that you have identified. And so I just give that to you in hard copy so you know what I'm talking about, but you have this in your email. And so as we talked at our last work session, we discussed having the board fill out kind of a prioritizing of the needs. And so if you can get back to that, if you can get that back to me, I'll collate the responses, and then we can use that as a jump off for our next study session on this topic.
Good. Thank you, Paul, for all your work on this, for kind of leading us through this process.
Thank you for your efforts too.
Well, I just might add that in our discussion, I think, that we had at the workshop, it's not only is it a division between now and the future, but it's also a real division between actual classrooms and schools and our support facilities, and how we prioritize those and score those in relationship to their impact on kids and so on, already having gone through the exercise partly during the meeting, I found it really difficult to balance that particular heavily weighted factor when we were looking at, say, replacing the maintenance facility or whatever, particularly the bus garage and maintenance facility and so on. There's obvious needs there, and but only sort of indirectly is there direct. It doesn't take 2 kids out of every classroom at the 3rd grade level or whatever, and it's real easy to recognize the needs, and that it's always been a dilemma, and so it's difficult to put money into those upgrades that are needed when you're looking at increasing enrollment and so on, and hard funding from the state like we've had up until last year. I know our task is only really partially underway, but I found that really hard to weigh. And I might mention that I know I forwarded some information to you, but formerly our DARE officer, now the chief of police at WSU, Bill Gardner is also the acting transportation director, and Bobby spoke to him today, and a good time maybe for one or the other of you to follow up on that. He got really excited about the opportunity for maybe 5 years down the road or more about collaborating between the transportation interests that the city has with the transit, WSU has in their master plan for where they're going forward. It just, as I said in our workshop, it doesn't make sense to me to have 3 completely different fleets, 3 completely different set of skilled mechanics, 3 completely different sets of tools and lifts and bus washing facilities and all of that, when there's a potential that we could combine forces in those efforts, as funding is going to be tight for Pullman Transit, and it's going forward. There's been some changes in federal law and funding streams that Pullman Transit really benefited from in the past. Those aren't going to be there anymore, so it's going to be a real opportunity, I think, to get together in that area. We obviously have needs. The vehicles aren't all the same, but as I mentioned in the workshop, many of them are built on the same chassis and have the same engines. There's only a limited amount because of Buy America and regulations at the federal level. There's only a limited amount of choices and on the state bid list. By and large, those vehicles that are available on the state bid list for school buses are built on the same chassis and so on. The shuttle buses that they buy for campus or the coast, even my former agency operates and so on. The ones we see back here that are operated by a community child care center that has transportation needs also. And more the regulations for what you can build and what you can operate for school kids and so on are luckily finally coming together, so it's possible for school kids to legally ride on transit buses and so on, not just in a tripper concept, but to and from school and so on, not having to drop them off a little ways off to meet all the federal regulations and so on and so forth. So I just think it's a real opportunity in that area, which is really problematic for us right now in terms of facility.
We'll make sure we follow up on that.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
they're interviewing for a new transportation director, but right now Bill's both the campus chief of police and the transportation director. He's already primed.
Our next item for discussion is the policy 6957, change orders for construction projects.
Thank you. Blew right by it.
There it is.
My fault, I didn't get a executive summary in here, so
I'm
we,
sorry. I thought I included your explanation from the special meeting last week, and I did not.
yeah, I didn't catch it. So you're not, I'm not gonna have a cheat sheet up here to remind me of my talking points, but basically, we talked earlier about the change orders in the construction project, and we have a existing board policy that is, in my estimation, quite constraining to allow the staff to move forward with change orders. It would cause the board to be meeting quite frequently in special meetings, because we can't, some of these change orders need to be decided on within a day or two once we get the information about them, or it holds up the project. And so we've on the other side of that, we don't want the board to be out of the loop, or for us as a staff to be moving forward on things that we find out later the board, it doesn't need approval of the board. So how do we balance that? So I took we took a stab at revising this this policy 6957. I talked to our project manager, and typically what they do is, and I don't know why it didn't happen on this project, but they have a resolution that addresses this on an individual project, because projects can be very small or very large, and as you can see some of the numbers that we've crossed out in here, it was kind of assuming pretty small projects, and large projects don't, like this, like the high school, don't come up all that often, and especially in a small school district. So it kind of requires some special attention to change proposals and change orders. We certainly don't want to change anything, authorize changes to the building that would be conceptual design changes, that sort of thing, without bringing that to the school board. So I'd ask the board to consider these. One of the options that's in this new revised language is to have a resolution that defines how we will handle change orders on a project by project basis. But in that absence, it also kind of lays forth some procedures that allows us to move forward as a staff, but also keep the school board informed, and would trigger board action in certain circumstances. So I'd ask you to consider that. We didn't take it to the policy committee, so we'll just, this is one I'd like to ask the board to consider as a full board. Just on a timeliness basis, we wanted to get something in place that would help us move forward with the project and not hold things up when we've got a list right now of that we have to consider of change proposals anywhere from $800 to what, $3,000-$4,000 that we need, and it's a long list of those. They don't add up to a significant amount of money, but we need to move forward with them and make a decision. I'm not sure most of these would, I mean, as staff, we're going to rely on our project management team for the advice on those. There was a change that we talked about at the work session about a change proposal regarding
library ceiling.
The library ceiling, thank you, yes. And that's more of a, it's really not a conceptual design change, but it's a visual change that those are the kinds of things that I think the board ought to take a look at.
So, remind me, Paul, was this, Wasted has no such policy for this, so did you get this language from the construction management team?
Well, conceptually, in our conversations, but no, I don't have, there is no draft, so this is my draft, based on conversations with our project management team and internal conversations that we've had with staff. So I'm open to suggestions and
I just don't know if it's clear, this idea of the substantial deviation of the intent of the accepted design. Because I think I just heard you say that changing the library ceiling does not change the design concept.
well, I don't think it's a substantial design concept change, but it is a visual change in that.
I
So
guess I don't know what the difference is.
yeah, and so
That's why I'm
that's
asking.
one. That's an example of one that I think the board needs to weigh in on before we make a decision on.
Yeah, I feel that way too.
So
But-
I don't know how to. I don't know
Yeah,
how to.
I'm not sure what the words are to say
Yeah.
that if you're changing what it's going to look like compared to the images that we saw, that's probably something we should discuss.
Yeah, we did not. We had, as a staff, had not seen the images of the library until it came up for a request to change. And then the images that we showed the board at the work session were images that we asked them to create so that we could better understand the change that they were proposing. But I know that unless you went through the plans, you wouldn't have known that the curved nature of the library ceiling was even proposed. Those are some detailed design features that the architects put in, and we will be surprised by some of those when we're done, because they that's part of their design concept. So I've asked them to, they've really been kind of neutral on this change. It is a contractor request because the time to create the curved ceiling is pretty onerous, and we've got some phasing issues that.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to discuss that
Yeah.
substantive issue. I'm trying to figure out how we can say
Yeah.
in policy language, correctly identify the things that the board might want to know about
Right.
in advance.
And so perhaps it's one of those things, maybe that's one where if it's not clear, the board president, the superintendent brings the board president, and the board president decides, is this something we need to take to the full board? So it's not just the
Yeah.
superintendent or the
Okay.
staff deciding.
I'm comfortable with that.
And we can put some language in that clarifies that piece, if that's acceptable.
Yeah, or somehow, maybe there's, I mean, I'm willing to help. Maybe there's a way we can research, or is there a different combination of words that spells that out more clearly? I'm not sure. It's not an area of expertise I have, but.
Well, and I have not, I haven't had the time to run this by our project management team, which would typically create the resolution that the board would pass around this. So I will, Shannon, I walked in here without a pen. Will you make a note for me tomorrow to thank you, to make sure that we forward this on to our project manager so that they review this language as well?
I may be remembering wrong, but I thought we increased the limit of change orders for the middle school when we did it, so we weren't having to have special
Right.
meetings constantly.
I don't know why that didn't happen this time, but
We must have,
Yeah.
because memory serves, we had no special meeting
Correct.
about LMS all the way through.
Right. I don't
And-
recall any, right.
And and now with having the specialized management team, as a project manager. It's really monitoring of the relationship between the architects and the contractor and the project manager, and then just keeping us informed. I would be reluctant, even from whatever the language is about design versus whatever, to consider myself an expert in either area, and would probably always weigh to a well-vetted set of information that told me why our team decided to go in the direction that they went in order to manage the budget and complete the project.
Yeah, what I'm thinking about are things that would substantially change what the board expected the appearance of the building to be. You know, I think infrastructure kinds of things, right? That's not going to change the expectation that you had, which in turn the community had for the building. Like if we decided to put, if we this is going to be extreme, but if we decided to put metal siding on instead of brick, that's the kind of scope of thing that I'm talking about. You know, in order to save money, I wouldn't want you to be surprised by that.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. That's the kind of thing I'm referring to.
And I guess, and you know, Allison, I guess, will help with crafting the language on this. What I was trying to express, you were giving a gross example, and I'll just give it right back. If that was the united consensus recommendation, that we needed to go that way to stay within budget and so on and so forth, I would be very reluctant to argue against it, or to even want to vote not to do it. So I like to have the vote when it's things where I can study and feel confident. Just as I mentioned in the agenda meeting for problem solving the other day, I like to have information and be involved when it relates to policy and direction, rather than where we have people at all three levels way more competent than me in this case. So I wouldn't, even if I hated metal siding, I wouldn't stand in the way and vote no on a recommendation to not to do it.
I'll just play devil's advocate though. When we have all three levels, that's one thing. This was a situation where the contractor has proposed a change. The architects so far claim to be neutral. We may need to make some choices or provide public input about what would be acceptable in our community. You know, it's not, so yeah, when there's all three levels of unanimity.
Okay.
But
Well, we will, I'll get our project manager I'll ask them to weigh in on this language, and maybe even provide a sample resolution that they have used before to address this situation. And just know that we do have some cost impact change proposals that we need to authorize, and they're in the, I think we added them up today, and they were just under $20,000 total cost on those. I mean, that's a high estimate, but it's probably more like 18, but somewhere in that neighborhood of $18,000 to $20,000. I just added them up quickly, and we need to meet on that within the next week to decide to authorize those. And so I just,
well,
you know,
I'm saying that even if they're 21, you're gonna make two different decisions, one about $18,000 worth of project change orders and another about 3, or whatever the policy is now, if we need to do that before we can properly change the policy
Okay.
about big changes like we voted on in the special meeting that totaled $135,000 or whatever, which I was entirely comfortable with the decision we made to do that. We needed to do it. But to hold up 20 things that add up to $21,000, it's not a good use of our time or of the contractor's time or of the construction team's time.
We just, you know, I'm not surprised that you feel that way, and I'm glad you do, and I'm getting nods around. So we'll proceed that way. We just do have this policy in place, and we need to address it. So we'll proceed and keep the board informed about changes that come forward.
If you feel like it would be more comfortable to have a motion until we develop the policy to proceed with the understanding that we've had at this meeting, I would be glad to, you know, to so move or whatever. But if you don't think you need it and can move forward, I would say, I'm not the chair, but have at it.
Okay. What do you think?
I think we should have a motion to authorize this.
Yeah, okay. Dan would feel more comfortable if we had a motion. I trust you guys more than he does. No, I, you know, it would be, it's in the minutes, the discussion's in the minutes, but a motion.
Well, Carl moved it, I'll second it, yeah.
Yeah.
And Shannon needs a motion to authorize, I'm
That
gonna,
we proceed with the pending change orders, the, and with review by the president, board president, and consensus among the construction team until we can develop a definitive long-range policy to address the high school project.
Okay.
And that might be just interim while we think about what the overall, I don't think it's good to have I think it would be good to have a process for projects that we do when we take them off the
small works roster.
small works roster and all that kind of thing, which this policy really more lends itself to. And then we have some parameters about that, what we call a project, but when, I think we need a policy time by time when we go out with, for bond. And we sell bonds and so on, then for that project, and in this case it was 2 projects, it was Lincoln, I mean it was Franklin and here. We need to have, we're going to be at this another 2.5 years and we need to have something down.
Yeah, and I think, I'd have to go back and look, but my memory was that we passed a resolution like this for Franklin.
Mm.
But I'm not absolutely sure. And maybe it was for both projects, but we haven't found that yet, so we need to go back and look at that. I don't think it would have been for both projects.
Okay. We have a motion and a second on the floor. Shannon, would you reread that motion, please?
Carl Johansson moved to proceed with pending change orders with review from the board president and the project management team in the time prior to approval of this policy. That's okay.
Okay.
Excellent.
So we have the motion on the floor. We have a second. Is there any further discussion from the board? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Against?
Thank you.
So you have the authorization now until we can massage this policy.
Good.
And I trust all of you. I think it's just a good idea that since we have a policy and we may exceed it, that the board's aware of it and authorizes us to.
Well,
You never know, that
when
could
in doubt,
keep
a
it in
resolution
audit.
from us trumps any policy that we have anyway.
Thank you.
Anything that will allow you to sleep better at night.
Yeah.
There's a little stress
I
in
know
that.
Paul's teasing me, but I know it is. Thank you.
Thank you for your discussion, and thank you for your motion, Carl.
Mhm.
All right. So is there any further information on that policy at this time?
Nope, I think
Alright.
we've massaged it pretty well.
All right,
So
okay.
are we discussing the library ceiling tonight, or is that a separate
Um,
time, or?
It will have to be a separate time. That was my intent. I didn't get it in the packet, so
Okay.
it'll have to be.
Very good.
We're not building the library yet, so we're good. We still have some time.
Perfect.
That's in phase
Two.
2B subset C, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we now move into our informational items. We have our administrative requirement update, our board calendar, and current enrollment. So
Oh,
the board can look over those items.
sitting here having fun.
And then we do have an executive session this evening for about 10 minutes in length. So I think what we'll do now is we can hear a motion from the board for
I move we recess into executive, clear the room and recess into executive session.
okay?
Second?
It's been moved and second that we move into recess for our executive session. We'll have about 5 minutes here for those that would like to leave the room. And thank you for attending.
Yeah, thanks.